Welcome, everyone. I'm Allison with Virtualization and Cloud Review. I'm thrilled to welcome you to today's event entitled Azure Governance, Protecting Data and Meeting Regulatory Requirements, sponsored by OTAVA and Veeam. Before we begin, I just want to cover a few housekeeping details. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please make sure to type those into the Q&A box, and we'll make sure to get those answered for you. OTAVA has provided some resources which correspond with today's event, so please take a moment to check those out. They are located to the right of your audience console. Today's webcast is being recorded, so keep an eye out for a link in your email to rewatch the presentation or share with colleagues. And now I am so thrilled to announce our speakers for today. We have the pleasure of hearing from some of the members of the OTAVA team. With us today, we have Jason Pullman, a Director of Public Cloud Solutions, Bobby Boughton, a Senior Account Executive, and Justin Sanabria, a Public Cloud Engineer. So we are in for a great event, and with that, I'll pass my time over to Jason to get us started.
All right. Thank you, Allison. Just a quick check. Can you hear me okay? We're all good?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining. Today, we're going to go over a lot of areas. We're going to show you a framework to follow, a step-by-step process, and we're going to do this pretty quickly. We only have a few slides here to do it. So, and then we'll do questions at the very end. We'll do a Q&A. But as we go through the slides, if you do have a question, we do encourage you to go ahead and type it in the box, and we'll just get to it at the very end. So, with that said, I'm going to go through the slides here. So, just a quick note about us, if you're not familiar with OTAVA. So we've been in the cloud business since 2008. Before that, colo space. Before that, dial-up. So we've been in the business for 30 years. And also, we're owned by a company a family-owned company that's been in business for 150 years. So quite an extensive background with OTAVA. We deliver secure, compliant, multi-cloud solutions. So we have our own cloud. We also do multi-cloud workloads out to Azure, and that's what we're going to be talking about today, is how to protect those and how to make those secure when it comes to compliances. So, and a quick shout out to our partner Veeam. We're going to talk about data protection here in a slide and how that's going to help with your compliancy efforts. As Allison mentioned, I'm Jason Pullman. I'm the field CTO for our Azure Public Cloud practice. I'm also a solutions architect for Microsoft Azure, as well as Justin Sanabria. My background goes back pretty far on the operations side, as well as the sales side through Dell and HP and different companies, and now here at OTAVA. So today I'll be speaking from both an operational perspective, as well as a compliance perspective. To bring a sales perspective to it and in a business outcome perspective, we have Bobby Boughton. Bobby, could you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. How you doing? I'm Bobby Boughton. I'm a senior account executive here at OTAVA. I have over 20 years of experience in the MSP industry. I have helped everybody from small mom and pop organizations to very large enterprises make the journey to the cloud, whether that be public cloud or the public cloud or private cloud environments. My specialty happens to be around Azure and also cybersecurity.
Yep, very good. Not to mention you led a very large practice for a very large company prior to joining OTAVA as well. So we're glad to have you today. Justin is a cloud engineer and also a Azure Solutions Architect, amongst many things he's certified on. Justin, could you introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Hey, everybody. I'm Justin Sanabria. I'm a public cloud engineer. I do a lot of the designing, implementing, and managing of our public cloud solutions in addition to our private cloud. I've been in the CSP, MSP space for over 15 years. So I love to be able to get my hands on any technology, and happy to be here today.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for being here, because it's going to give us a diverse perspective here on each of the slides. I'm going to call on Bobby and Justin to add perspective as we go through each one of these. So let's dive right in here. Like I said, it's going to be kind of short and sweet. And one thing I will let you know is I'm pretty sure you're going to learn something. And so I would invite you to stay with us to the very end, because we're going to make it informative, educational, and maybe at times humorous. So we'll have a little fun with this today and get through this relatively easy. And like I said, I'm sure you're going to learn something. So we're going to discuss the governance. We're going to explain why you need it. We're going to start out with that. And then we're going to follow a framework. And there's a 6-phase framework we're going to show you that's really easy to follow. And so that's why I would encourage you not to only listen today, but also download the deck. And I believe Allison mentioned the tech brief is also available for you guys. So the tech brief and this deck is very similar. So either one will serve you very well. But we're going to cover each of those 6 phases in depth. A little bit about Azure Security, and then how the security can make your businesses, I guess I wouldn't say audit proof, because I don't know if there's such a term, but make your audits a lot easier with these tools. And then next steps, and we'll take questions. So we'll get right into this. Why do you need it? Now, what is governance? People hear this and you think, okay, are we going to talk about IaaS governance today or data governance? Well, a little bit of both, actually. But what does it produce? It produces consistent behavior. If you're adding new workloads, if you're adding new business units, if you're some sort of acquisition that you're bolting on, to have a scalable plan together that you can follow, a blueprint, if you will, that you can follow each time to make that deployment consistent. Think about it not only from, and we're going to go through the 6 phases here in a minute, but from a security perspective, from an accessibility perspective, through access controls, through a reporting perspective. It's going to make it easy to bolt on. And Justin, in a couple of the slides here, I'm going to ask you to kind of talk about the scalability piece as we get through this. But we also wanted to put some verticals here in case you fall into one of those and you're thinking, okay, how does it apply to my particular business? So if you're in healthcare and you're following HIPAA guidelines and you're following the technical safeguards of HIPAA, 164312, if you're familiar with that, if you've gone through audits before. But be able to have access controls, protecting the data, having policies to enforce the protection of the data, and being able to report out on it is very critical. From finance, from a PCI DSS perspective, when you start to talk about the 12 technical requirements of PCI DSS, and we're actually going to focus in today on requirements 7 and 8, role-based access control and access controls and reporting. So think about having all at your fingertips and being able to collect that. We're going to talk about that today to make that process easier. And then software companies. This one we mentioned GDPR, but data sovereignty is what we're really talking about here. And talking about Azure policies today, about how to keep your data and your resources in certain regions as to not to violate those compliances. So Bobby, I went over at a high level, but can you dive into maybe each of these areas and your opinion on how driving governance can make these verticals easier to maneuver and also report out for auditing purposes?
Sure. So I think I'm going to take it back one level up from this. Azure has something called Azure WAF, which is the well-architected framework. And governance is definitely a part of making sure that your environment is using their principles behind the well-architected framework. For each one of these particular verticals, if you will, in the governance space, there's also something known as blueprints. And the blueprints, we'll get to talk to them a little bit more in detail, but there are blueprints to help drive each one of the types of requirements from a security perspective, a access perspective, rules that govern where certain environments can live, who has access to them, who can make changes to them, those types of things. So the key is that what it does is it really simplifies from a business perspective, having consistent infrastructure from start to finish. And as the company is scaling, making sure that all of those policies that were developed in the well-architected framework are maintained through the life of this particular environment. Doesn't mean to say that this is a set it and forget it type of situation. Just like any other types of policies, they should be reviewed on a regular basis. Microsoft is coming up with additions and modifications to their blueprints on a regular basis and should be revisited for those reasons. So overall, it really gives a very clear guideline for businesses to ensure to their customers that they're meeting the requirements that their customers are requiring from them.
Very good. Well, a good plug on the well-architected framework and how governance plays a big key in that to make sure that as we're going to talk through this deck, scalability. So I'm going to get to the next slide and we're going to kind of dive into this process. So you might think governance, all right, we talked about it. It seems like a blue ocean out there. It's there's many different facets, and there is. And just like anything else, you have to break it down. And just like the framework Bobby just spoke about, where I believe there's 6 phases in that as well, 4 cores and 2 iterative, there's 6 phases here for the governance framework. In each of these, you can break it down, and then there is some overlap, as you'll see. And we're going to talk about not only just the foundationals, building that foundation so you can scale, but also all the way to advanced governance. And Bobby's already mentioned blueprints, and we're going to touch on a little bit later here in that 6th phase. So we're not going to dive into this thing right here. We're going to segment this out and talk about each phase individually. So with any framework, what does it bring your business or your organization? It's really consistency, agility, and scalability, right? That's what we're following here to make a consistent, repeatable behavior. Once you do that, think about troubleshooting, think about expansion, think about scaling IT organizations with the business, because that's usually a big challenge. This makes those processes a lot easier. Not bulletproof, but a lot easier, right? So we're going to jump right into this, into the first phase here. Now, the first phase is really the foundational setup. You have to have that foundation to be able to scale properly. And when I say that, there's a little image there of using management groups and policies and subscriptions and resource groups and breaking those resource groups into functional areas. Now, those functional areas can be either security boundaries or billing boundaries, perhaps. But these type of structures can allow you to efficiently do this rather than just put all resources out there, apply tags, and have a flat type of organization. This allows us to build a hierarchy from the ground up and build that foundation for success. We found that using this, and this is not an OTAVA creation, this is coming from Microsoft and Microsoft best practices. But what we found is that bolting on either new countries that you want to service, new business units, like I mentioned before, this sort of model allows us to do it very easily. We have scaled our customers tremendously by using this foundational concept. And as simple as it is, you're going to see in there to the right-hand side, policies, RBAC, and then budgets we're going to talk about through this. So to start it all out, Azure Active Directory, no more, right? Entra ID, right? We've been discussing this for the last, 8 months or so, that is Entra ID, but it allows you to do many things. We talk about Entra ID as your identity provider. It used to be your edge of your network, maybe your firewall was the edge, right? And you had to concern yourself with that, with the policies, access controls, different things through the firewall. Now it's changed because everything is out in the cloud, right? So identity providers are now the edge of our network. They really are the edge of our perimeter of our security boundaries, right? So there's a lot of things to go into Entra ID that a lot of people miss, either with Plan 1 or Plan 2, can be from conditional access all the way to access reviews for your audits. And when we're going to talk about a few of these today, and that's really comes around to access control policies, with different controls that you can put for conditional access. They're called signals. Think about let's use an example here that hit recently. And I may be too early on this one, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. The MGM example that happened earlier this year. If there were conditional access policies on device, has to be registered within Entra ID, maybe country, maybe location, maybe impossible travel, anything like that might have prevented. I'm going to say might have, but it definitely would have helped the situation. Conditional access policies are not, what we found are not being used enough. So conditional access policies and access controls can be used, access control can be used in the free version, but P1, if you get Entra ID P1, it unlocks all of access control. With P2, you get into PIM, which is Privileged Identity Management and Identity Protection. Now, PIM will allow time-bound access. So say you have a third party that is helping you to do something. And you actually go to an audit and you say, okay, I have this third party, and the auditor is going to ask you, okay, can you give me a report of access and time of access? Depending on the vertical you're in, right? It may get that critical. With PIM, you can do time-bound access, and not only time-bound access, you can control that they have to put you notify them, and they have to put a justification in there. So that justification can then go to an audit report, and you can justify and show why this third party had access to your network and when they had access. So a very powerful feature with PIM. And if you want to learn more about that, of course, we can always be at the very end. We're going to have another slide, just looking down the list here, about PIM. So we'll touch on a little bit more. Now, identity protection is where the access reviews come into play, and real-time protection. It allows you also to background checks for security risk. And then you can take the risk and use that as control in your access control policies. So you could have an access control policy to say, okay, if this user is a medium risk as identified through identity protection, I want to force them to do MFA, or I want to double check that their device is actually registered into Entra ID. There's much control there. So again, the edge of your network, the perimeter of your network now is out in the cloud. Need to use the identity provider to control that. Another thing we mentioned to control is with role-based access controls. We're going to touch on RBACs quite a bit through this, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this now. But setting up those RBAC policies into your blueprints is going to be very powerful for scaling. So I've spoken a lot here, Bobby. From a business perspective and business outcomes, what do you want to bring and want to talk about here with Entra ID and RBAC?
Yeah, I think the notion of identity is the new perimeter is something that we definitely have to take into consideration. And the way I look at it is the more variables that we address with identity, right? And it's not just the individual username and password anymore, using some kind of biometrics or any of that sort of thing. It's all the other physical components that we can address, those variables. The more that we can control and identify, the more secure the environment becomes. The only issue is that people live in a mobile society, and we use a variety of different tools to be able to access corporate resources on whatever cloud they're on. And what winds up happening is the organization needs to make sure that they have a strong set of requirements for each individual type of device that an individual can wind up accessing resources from. I think that's where blueprints come in, but I think that is where all of the other ACP, PIM, IP, and RBAC all come into play together, giving consistency and the ability for people to work in today's modern access environment.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Justin, as far as scalability, using a framework like this, what have you seen how it brings efficiencies to adding on either new business units and or acquisitions?
Sure. Yeah, having this foundational structure from the beginning really allows you to scale out and really reduce the management overhead that you have from an operational perspective. So, grouping things with dynamic groups where you can have attributes that would inherit to specific business units or job functions that would allow you to kind of standardize what you want that RBAC to look like and really scale that out. And then the policies and blueprints, as you guys have mentioned, are a really good tool to standardize across the board and put those on a top level, which could be your management group, a subscription, a resource group. So if you have developers, third parties, we can get those pretty granular, and that's a really powerful thing to do. And
Yep.
it allows you to really control it and have less of an overhead.
Yeah, great points, from both of you. And the key here is that with RBAC, also when we start talking about auditing purposes and or compliance purposes, can be used to really control access either to the management plane or the control plane or the data plane. And so it's going to be very critical when you go through your audits to have that list of who has access to what. With RBAC and the policies on how they're applied, it would be very powerful to take to your audit. All right, I am going to phase 2. So we talk about security and compliance enforcement. I know we had a question about that already. We're going to touch on that all through this, and there's a specific piece of this, if we went too high level that you want to take a deeper dive, please just post it in the questions. We're going to talk about Azure policies, and the policies, the importance is to bring consistency across the organization. That policy could be enforcing, you can only do certain type of resources in, and we mentioned GDPR earlier, only certain type of resources in a certain region for data sovereignty, that they can only deploy this, and or a policy has to be applied, and or you have to have backup, and you have to have either Defender or something else applied to your resources. You have to have certain tags. Policies can be very, very powerful. And it's a tool you want to make sure you're using because it's going to come in handy as we're talking about bringing that consistent behavior in all your deployments. So helping out in compliance and governance, it's going to be automating that compliance. When you have those policies that are consistent across all of your business units, being able to bring that consistency gives you that peace of mind knowing that, oh, did I miss, or did some rogue IT over here, or did somebody do something over here? I need to look at those resources to make sure everything's applied. You apply a policy to the management group level, everything filters down, right? So that's the value of setting up that foundation to be able to start to build some of the consistent behavior we're talking about. The consistent rules, as you can see there under consistency, I just kind of talked about, but the remediation, fixing non-compliant resources through remediation tasks. So if you've been into the Azure console, which I assume many of us have here they're on this call, and you've gone to policies or you've gone to look at remediation steps for compliance, and when you first deploy, you're going to probably see a lot of red. We always do, right? You start to apply the policies to reduce that, and that helps you build your blueprints. So very powerful with policies for compliance enforcement. If you've been out there to the policies, you know some of the CAN policies for the different compliances for PCI, DSS, for HIPAA are out there, and you can go through and apply those at a data plane or control plane level. So very powerful to use. We're going to talk about Defender for Cloud, bringing everything together, because Defender for Cloud actually covers more than just a VM. We're talking about databases, key vaults. You're talking about different things that it can protect and bring that all back into a centralized single pane of glass, if you will, for everything going on in the environment. So that's a very powerful tool that will bring increased visibility and control. And we're gonna discuss more about Defender for Cloud. We actually got a slide dedicated to it at the very end here. So, Bobby, from a business perspective and business outcome, the value of consistency, what efficiencies do you see this bringing for the business?
Yeah, I think consistency, drives drives the notion of ensuring that through the process of scaling out an environment, you wind up covering all of those policies that were deemed necessary for a variety of different compliances, and making sure that you're, in the old days, what we used to do is we used to sit down with the NIST guide and go in and take a look at all the policies that apply to a particular compliance requirement. And you would have to make sure that you were accounting for that. In today's world with Azure, we can go in and apply these policies through the blueprints in a fairly consistent and easy way to do. And what it does is it takes a little bit of the guesswork out, so it makes the process of scaling a lot more efficient. And when I talk about efficiency, I usually like to talk about the dollars that are attached to that for everybody that's involved in it. Right. So overall, consistency does wind up saving a company, significant amounts of resource time, and in addition to that, money that goes along with it. Not to say that you haven't skipped something that could potentially wind up causing, a payout for having some sort of data breach down in the future. So.
Right.
Those are the things that I think of when I hear about how this, unified security winds up playing within a business.
Justin, just real quick, anything on policies that I may not have touched on that you want to make sure that we do touch on today?
I think you covered a lot of the key points. When it comes to scalability, it's going to allow us to have that control. And touching back on the RBAC and the cost perspective, it allows us to, bring in companies into our tenant, let's say, and have that consistency without having to troubleshoot or stray away from our consistencies. So it does help with an operational perspective. And the remediation is a very secure way to do that because it's a service principle that nobody really has access to, and you can apply that from an RBAC perspective as well.
Yep. So policies very, very important to your compliance efforts and making sure you're meeting your compliance goals. Thank you both. All right. And also, you might say, well, why Microsoft? Microsoft, you're like, okay, they're a newer player, I would say. However, Defender for Cloud is not just for Azure. Right. Defender for Cloud can cover many resources in Azure, but Defender itself is a complete package with Defender for Endpoint, for other different services so that you can use. It's a complete package now. So a lot of things you're going to see now, what used to be like, say, for instance, Defender for 365. Well, it's no longer called that. It's called something else. So they're expanding the resources for better protection across the organization. In fact, we recently read, and Bobby, keep me honest here, we recently read how much they're spending on R&D in the security realm. It's $20 billion over the next 5 years. That R&D effort we're going to be talking about as we go through the slides. Bobby, did I misrepresent that number, or is that what you said?
No, you're absolutely correct. And just to give you an idea of the different number of defenders that are available through Microsoft, there are 10 different specific Defender tools. Everything for Defender for Cloud, server, storage, SQL, Key Vault, App Service, Resource Manager. There's so many different defenders. The interesting thing about it is once you've dealt with Defender for Cloud, you pretty much know how all the others, are configured and work. So there's, again, consistency in how you deploy those.
Right. Yeah. Very good. The Key Vault. What is the Key Vault? Safeguards sensitive information such as keys, passwords, and certificates. Their Key Vault is used quite a bit. You might think, okay, and Justin, I'm going to tap you for resources and uses here to give us some examples of Key Vault and thinking about having all of your sensitive information for access in these resources inside a Key Vault. What type of use cases have you seen that a lot of our customers are using Key Vault for?
Yeah, so a lot of customers who have their own applications that are leveraging Key Vault. So there may be a service that needs to know about a secret, and that can be stored in the application that's encrypted and has permissions only to that application. And that's not stored in clear text, right? So we're not actually storing those in the application or the web. It's stored in the Key Vault, which has a lot of availability, encryption, and is a very robust system.
Very, very good. You can see that it's seamless security here is what you think of it. And that's a great point, is that not storing passwords and or access credentials in clear text. Awesome point. The RBAC, we're back to RBAC for data protection. In protecting access to that data, using built-in roles and regular reviews, and or you have the opportunity to customize your roles. So if you have, again, we'll go back to the third-party instance that we mentioned earlier. If you have somebody coming in and you want to make sure they're restricted only to the access control plane only, no data access, especially when you're talking about GDPR, very important. So even though there's hundreds of roles that they have, of course, you can create your own. Having these roles in there is critical, or following these roles, and then looking at your compliancy dashboard to find out how those roles are being enforced and how those policies are being enforced. And that's all going to come back and really serve you well when your audit comes to term here. The backup and replication, this is an area for data protection that you have options with Microsoft, which is key here. And why it's key is that there's a native Azure backup that works very well, very well. Or you could easily go to the marketplace and deploy a Veeam solution, which works very well. So if you already have a Veeam solution on premise and you want to extend that into the cloud, into 365, Veeam has capabilities, and OTAVA is a valued Veeam partner, which we can implement that for you. So just because Azure has native utilities and doing a lot of this stuff, if you have your own third party that's already being used elsewhere or a different cloud or whatever, more than likely that vendor's in the marketplace. So don't overlook that. And then also understand how the native tools in Azure can serve you as well. Some talking points here real quick. In restoring, you know what a lot of companies did, and with the recent CrowdStrike debacle, is they identified the issue, VM's down. What did they do? They went from either a backup and or a DR that did not have replication. And they restored from there. And OTAVA has served our customers very well that were impacted, that did run CrowdStrike within their infrastructure. We restored those environments very quickly with our Veeam backup service. So a shout out to Veeam there for providing that service and how we were able to get people back online very quickly. So I'm going to jump to the next slide here, and this is phase 4. So this is where we've been talking about infrastructure up to this point, and you might think that policies, RBAC, budgets, controls, management groups, et cetera, is all good, but it is from an IS perspective. This slide with Microsoft Purview really talks about data governance. And data governance, you might say, wow, that I wish that's a pipe dream someday, maybe. Where's the genie? it's not that far off, to be honest with you. And Microsoft Purview, if you haven't heard of it yet, gives you a way to actually scan in the data and use it to categorize the data. And not only categorize, but add metadata to identify that collection of data. Because I'm sure, just like everybody, you got repos of data here, 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 and here, and spread across everywhere. It'd be good to either ingest that, classify it, report on it, make sure security around it to reduce your risk management. We all have this problem. So the tool that Microsoft has been working on is Purview. So Purview will allow you that visibility to create an up-to-date map of your entire data estate. And you guys may have heard this. I'm hearing this more and more often, a term that's being adopted: digital estate, infrastructure, data, everything. Your data estate, though, are those repos that we would like to classify and be able to identify fairly quickly. And then once you classify that, you put rules and policies on top of that, access controls on top of that, and then you can report out on that. And think how handy that would be to hand off to your CISO, from an IS perspective, or a data scientist perspective, handing off to the CISO that, hey, here's the report of all of our classifications for our regulatory requirements. Makes it very easy, and including security on top of that. So a very powerful product. If you're not familiar with it, give us a call so we can have a conversation, or simply you know how to Google it, I'm sure. So the information protection, I did mention that you can label and protect sensitive data. So think about for PCI, or let's talk about PII. That you can label all your PII information, no matter where it will be at in your organization, and be able to report on that, who has access to that. That's what Purview information protection does for you. And apply the access control policies through that utility in one simple interface is very powerful. Now, I'm making it sound very easy, right? There's always things that to get this off the ground, it has to take into account. That's access to the different repos. The beauty of it is you do not have to move the data into a repo that Purview scans. It scans data in place. That is a very powerful feature of this tool. So keep that in mind when you're looking at data classification utilities and how powerful that Purview is, being able to scan in place. Bobby, many different facets from a business outcome perspective and efficiencies. What's on your mind on Purview and how this can help our friends out there that are on this webinar?
Yeah, I think the last point that you made, for most businesses that have, multiple data repositories, is trying to keep track of where sensitive information is at and being able to secure that information so it's not disseminated to people that shouldn't have access to it, right? Whether they be internal or, bad actors out there. I think that is probably the challenge, and Purview solves for that by looking at, like you mentioned, looking at and identifying data in all the repositories that you may have. The interesting thing is that it can also look outside of Azure itself. So you have the ability to scan databases that may be in a private cloud environment as well, and gather information from that to be able to secure that.
Very good, absolutely. And as you're hearing here, we spent 3 slides on IaaS governance, like I mentioned earlier. This covers the data governance piece. So the scalability, the efficiency, the standardization. I can go on and on, right, about how this would help a business. A lot of people just don't know how to get it off the ground, and that's where we can help. So I'm going to jump to the next slide here and talk about monitoring. And Justin, I'm going to call on you on this one as well. It's the visibility to have into the environment and what you can do, and not only collect, but analyze the data as well from many different aspects of Azure, either through metrics, logs, traces, etc. Azure Monitor can also integrate with some automation and remediation tasks as well. So a very powerful native utility to allow you to monitor on what's going on and also inform perhaps your incident response team if an incident does happen. To be able to go in there to a central location and understand what's going on, what's happened, what's changed, who accessed what, all that information can be made available in Azure Monitor. The different facets, so I don't sell it short, Justin, from a technical perspective, what's the visibility that it brings to you and our support operations team for servicing our customers?
Yeah, so there's a wide variety of visibility that we can see through Azure Monitor, and it could be things like metrics, which we can look at CPU usage, memory consumption, disk space. But there's another tool that you can use within Azure Monitor that's very, very powerful, and it's called KQL. So it's a native language that allows you to get extremely granular and use that with Azure Monitor to alert on very granular metrics and logs. You can also control what you want to be sent by using a log analytics workspace. So there's a lot of different utilities that are out there that are all tied into Azure Monitor. And they've changed this semi-recently where anything that has to do with monitoring, analyzing, that's all under the umbrella of Azure Monitor. So it allows us to create alerts that we can standardize across environments and apply those using JSON templates or what have you to any of our customers and allow that same visibility across the board. So very, very powerful and a lot of insight in there.
Yeah, good mention on the KQL. Very powerful language to pull out what you need in these reports. And the good thing with Azure, it provides canned KQL queries. So you can quickly access what you're looking for, right? So, and then we talk about bringing it all together, okay? And we start doing that, we're talking about Microsoft Sentinel. So Sentinel is their SIEM product that you can bring in logs and data from many different data points, not just from what's in Microsoft, but also from third parties as well, to give a holistic view of what's happening on your digital estate. We have a whole slide on Sentinel, so I'm not going to touch about it here in detail. That's why I only have a sentence or two here, but so we can get to it. It's coming up in just a few slides. And then PIM, we talked about PIM to be able to monitor privileged access, and we mentioned that with third parties. PIM is a feature of Plan 2 with Entra ID, so if you want to enforce that, you would have to bump your plan up to P2. To get that, or a E5 type license to get that feature, but time-bound access to critical infrastructure, because you have a third party, maybe a certain business unit needs access to something, just maybe do month-end reports or something like that. You can restrict access with PIM, so very powerful there. The sixth phase is advanced governance. So as we've gone through this, you can tell we're at the last slide of that framework, but very powerful slide. And we've kind of led up to this, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. We talked about blueprints, creating that standardized deployment of environments, not only for my compliancy purpose, but adding on new workloads as well. So it streamlines that process. And think about if you can just take that structure, as we showed you earlier, the management groups. Say you're expanding to the EU, create a new management group and a structure for EU, and then you have that fine line to show your auditor or your CISO or your compliancy expert that, hey, we don't do it just by tags or something else. We do it all the way to the top to a management group. We provide that security boundary to the infrastructure. The blueprint is we don't see that used that often out in the field. We use it consistently, and it's to create that consistent behavior, repeatable deployment that gives us our compliancy and standards, which can then in turn efficiency to scale as well as tracking and reporting. So Bobby, I'm going to come back to you for this to close us out on this slide on the value that you see. And you kind of touched on it already, but the value you really see to create that behavior from a security perspective.
Well, first thing is you don't have to recreate the wheel. Azure winds up having a whole host of blueprints that have been pre-developed to use as the guideline for a variety of different compliances. It does give you the ability to create your own custom blueprints as well, which if you have certain policies that you want to apply to certain resources, you can certainly do that as well. I think overall, it's really maintaining consistency. As things change over time, Microsoft is going in and making those types of changes. If a particular compliance winds up having a new requirement based on new technology that's being used. Right now, AI is one of the technologies that is driving the revisiting of some of these compliance requirements. New compliance requirements are coming out. CMMC didn't really exist 2 years ago. CMMC is a big thing now. There's a blueprint for that. So Microsoft is constantly developing this, so it keeps you current and ahead of the game if you use that standardized blueprint for these types of things. If something standardized doesn't cover you specifically, you can go in and modify that. So for the business, keeping consistent, making sure that the policies that are in those particular blueprints are applied universally.
Keeping up with the business, implementing new revenue streams, being able to quickly and easily scale your environment with the business. You've heard this all through each phase from the team here. So scalability, efficiencies, repeatability, think about how you can implement that to be in compliance with anything that you have. Like we said, Bobby mentioned the blueprints that are out there, the CAN ones. We mentioned the policies that are out there that are CAN. So we also want to make sure that everybody understands the barrier to entry is very low here with this. Once you understand how to use it, what's out there, and how to make it efficient. And we've had a lot of practice of that. So thank you, Bobby and Justin, for that. We're going to talk about, I mentioned 2 slides that we're really going to focus on Defender and then also Sentinel. And then we'll be wrapping up here in just a second. Just a quick case study. Now, with Land O'Lakes, everybody has heard of Land O'Lakes. I mean, they're a global company. And I read through this, and they protect about 10,000 endpoints with Defender for Cloud, and they do it through bring everything back into Sentinel so they can understand what's going on. All the devices are registered in their Entra ID, as we mentioned earlier, so you don't get access unless the device is registered on Entra ID and goes through sophisticated access controls based on country, based on region, country, and then also they have in there if you're traveling and it looks like, you know, they log in New York and then they're in the afternoon they're in India or China, you can block them that way. So they've invested a lot of time and effort into their layer of defense using Defender and access control policies. A very powerful case study for the Microsoft products. So if you haven't had a chance to look through these, there's Land O'Lakes and several out there from the Microsoft site. Now, in lieu of only having 12 minutes left, I'm going to jump right into the next slide and have a conversation about Defender. And when you look at Defender, Bobby mentioned earlier that there's Defender for about everything now, and you see there Microsoft 365 for Defender. It's no longer called that, so they recently changed that, just like Azure AD to Entra ID. So it's to expand across because Defender for XDR now can take in many different facets, bring a lot of low-level information into a single pane of glass where you're able to quickly identify to see any lateral movement of any security threats within your environment. And really that's what XDR does for you. It takes in a preset amount of application data that you can bring in, meaning there's a lot of plugins and controls for a lot of different resources, and bring that information in. As you look in here, you see cloud apps, email collaboration, endpoints, all for compliance purposes to be able to report on, see what's going on in your network, and give you some of that lateral visibility. Bobby, just real quick, I want you to touch on this, on just the powerful unified visibility that that Defender brings to us from an XDR perspective.
Yeah, I think if we just take one quick step back to the case study, one of the things that in that case study came to light was during the situation with Log4j, they had some additional XDR external tool that they were using in addition to Microsoft Defender. And what wound up happening is Defender wound up detecting the anomaly significantly before their third-party solution did. And I think one of the reasons behind it is something that we mentioned a little earlier, which is the amount of money that Microsoft is spending on security and security products for, over the next 5 years. It's going to be $20 billion. And I estimate it's probably going to be more than that because of malicious AI. The interesting part is that Defender in whatever version you're consuming it, it winds up being able to detect things much quicker, any kind of anomalies that are new on the horizon. And the reason for it is that Microsoft collects information regarding all the threats that it's detecting. Anything that looks like a potential threat winds up getting put into a special category, and then it starts alerting if they start seeing it over a broad range of customers that are experiencing the same thing, and it flags it right away and gives us an ability to be able to then go in and remediate for that. So I think Defender has some tremendous advantages, and then leading into Sentinel, that winds up, just adding the icing to the cake, if you will.
Yeah, great point, and thank you for pulling in that from the case study. Perfect example, and we're going to do that not only for the slide, but the Sentinel slide here in just a second. Now, you might say, okay, XDR sounds great. I want to get started. Well, if you have business premium license, if you have an E3 or E5, there's several others that give you access to XDR capabilities, but you could start using that today if you have any of those licenses through 365 today for Microsoft. The next slide, seeing that we have a few minutes left, we want to give everybody a few minutes for Q&A here, is about Sentinel. So Sentinel really is the seam. This brings everything together, empowering your SOC team or your CISO team or your incident response team or your security guy. So that's a lot of things. That's a lot of us all have one security guy, but it empowers them, bringing everything together. And the beauty about Microsoft Sentinel is not just for Microsoft products. It's for anything that can send logs into the SIEM to report out on. What it does, it helps bring everything in to start doing some holistic learning. You could even AI capabilities within it to reduce alert fatigue, to really understand and get to the bottom of an issue that's happening. Now, we mentioned with XDR, lateral visibility. Sentinel gives holistic through the whole organization, everything from your third-party apps to your Azure to your premise-based private clouds, everything you may have. So bringing that all together and then using a term which I don't think is listed in here, but if you haven't heard about it yet, SOAR, which is Security Orchestration, Automation, and Response, to do something with this data, to create some automation, to start the process should a malicious intent or a malicious user start to enter the organization. Now, with all of this, you might say, okay, this is all I have to do to be secure? No, but to be vigilant, yes. It's going to give you that visibility you're going to need for making sure your business and your data workloads are secure. So Bobby, just real quick, from your security perspective and background, the value of bringing everything together from a compliancy perspective, what's the value you want to discuss today?
First off, it's efficiency. And the other thing about Microsoft Sentinel is the AI capabilities behind it that really help drive the automation for remediation steps. So what winds up happening is having that having that built into the SIEM product and giving it SOAR capabilities and using AI to do certain things like threat hunting and those types of things, I think sets this particular product above everything else that I've seen. There are some commercial third-party solutions like Splunk that if you put them side to side, I think the AI side, I believe Azure is a little bit ahead of where Splunk is at. But then you have to take a look at the total cost of ownership portion of it too. Sentinel tends to be less expensive to use for an organization than going out and getting a third-party product like Splunk.
Yeah. Great points. Just the visibility, the efficiency that it brings, especially for incident response, and to help facilitate that, to get to the bottom of what's going on in your environment quickly and easily. And it could go for any SIEM product, but Sentinel is a great product to bring it all together. So with that said, we're going to just move forward. Next steps. So contact OTAVA. We've been in the business for many, many years, been doing this for a lot of our customers, but some things that we want to make sure you're aware of right now. We have the fortunate opportunity to be able to tap into a bucket of money from Microsoft right now to move new workloads or migrate new workloads into Azure. So I haven't seen one that's this amount where I would almost, and we put it in there, the ones that we have done already covered 100% of the migration fees. So this can range from a small 10-hour migration all the way to 100 hours. We've seen it 100% covered. So if you're thinking about moving some workloads in Azure, I'd like to talk about the opportunity to do so. Give us a call, let us know. All of our contact information is in there. We're also offering a security posture check because we touched on a lot of that. Now it's a high level, but you can gain greater visibility into your organization from the outside in and address any gaps and options, and we can certainly help you with that. So please contact us if you're interested in that. And then we also have an access control service. We actually have two services for Entra ID Plan 1 and Plan 2, getting access controls together and conditional access policies for Plan 1, and introducing PIM and access reviews with Plan 2. So if you're interested in that, please let us know. Be happy to help. So Allison, let's get to some of the questions that we have today.
Yes, thank you so much, Jason, Bobby, and Justin. That was such a great presentation. I do just want to remind the audience, if you have any questions, feel free to put those into the Q&A box. But besides that, we got a great question coming in from Josh. Josh wants to know what workloads are considered to be eligible for the fee-waived migration program and how much will be covered.
Yeah, and so it depends. And so let me expand on that. The first one is that any new workload. So if you already have a workload out in Azure, right, to do a well-architected review or something like that, it would not be covered under this bucket of money. It is for migration of new workloads out into Azure. The second part of the question is what I've seen thus far is, and we've done several of these, is 100% of the migration has been covered. One was 50 hours that we did, one was 10, and I think the others came in about 25 hours. And that all was covered 100%. So if you have any questions about the workload, what we'll do is put together a program, just have a workshop, review the workload itself, what it would take to build it out in Azure. We'll do an assessment and find out how much is going to be spent out in Azure on an annual basis, and then we can see what we qualify for as far as funding. Hopefully that helps, Josh.
All righty.
Okay. Go ahead, Allison.
We have time for one more question. It's from Derek. Derek wants to know, with governance, what is the #1 benefit of using the framework you presented?
Yeah, I think we said it many times. Good question. Great question. And I want to pass this around to Bobby and Justin as well. But for me, it's repeatable, consistent behavior. Just real quick, Bobby, throw it to you, and then Justin will throw it to you for what comes to mind is the most important piece of following this framework does for a business.
I would say consistency and efficiency.
Yep. There you go. Justin?
Yep, I would say about the same. But not only that, it's following the principles and best practices that Microsoft is presenting to you.
There you go. I love it, and for scalability. So, Allison, if there's any more questions that come in, we'll be happy to answer them after hours, and/or our contact information is all over the deck in the also the tech brief, and so be happy to answer them if anybody else has any other questions.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. Well, it looks like that's all the time we have for today. Thank you, Jason, Bobby, Justin, for being with us. And thank you to the audience for attending today's webcast. And of course, thank you to OTAVA and Veeam for sponsoring today's event presented by Virtualization and Cloud Review. Thank you again for attending and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.